Alright, YouTube, standard disclaimer, I'm talking about psychotropic substances here, which may or may not be legal in your state. I'm not saying that they're safe, I'm not encouraging or condoning their use. You are responsible for your own actions in their entirety, and I shall not be held criminally or civilly liable for any of your actions as the result of watching this video. With that out of the way, it's time for the Occult, video 129 on the topic of psychotropics and mind expansion. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experiences with psychedelics in this video and sort of the spiritual counterpart to this. Now, if you're interested in reading about more elaborate feelings that I have on this general subject, I did write a book several years ago called Psychedelic Spirituality, and that essentially is my final word on the subject, generally speaking. It goes into some encyclopedic content about mind-altering substances, some of my experiences, some of my philosophical and social thoughts on the drug war, things of that nature, the traditional use of certain psychedelics, and so forth. Now, the substance that I use the most was technically Salvia Divinorum. Outside of, like, cannabis, of course, smoking weed, but that's not really a psychedelic, generally speaking. Spice fucked me up, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. But as far as the actual psychedelics, Morning Glory and Salvia were those that I used the most. And I enjoyed them both. Now, one of the reasons I stopped giving people educational advice, generally speaking, on psychotropics is that I noticed a pattern that whatever conclusion the general core of the population came to regarding a psychedelic, I was on the opposite side. So Morning Glory, which a lot of people said, well, I had a bad trip, or it was a dirty high, or it didn't do anything but make my limbs hurt, I actually thought it was wonderful. It was just shy of literally heavenly. Of course, heavenly blue is the most commonly consumed subspecies thereof of Ipomoea tricolor. I found Salvia to be immensely enjoyable. Now, most people, when they try Salvia, they never bother to use it again because it's just so warped. I thought it was wonderful. I thought LSD was easier than mushrooms. I thought, most people thought the coming up on LSD was easier than the coming down. I found the opposite. And the reverse for psychedelic. And I was also reversed on that. I thought the coming up was easier, the coming down was a little bit odd. And so I stopped giving people advice because I think there's something about my mentality that's almost the direct reverse of many people in this world on the topic of psychedelics. But I'll take you through some of my experiences here and what I derived from them. The first substance that I ever used, I hadn't even seen marijuana in the real world, let alone try it. And I tried Morning Glory. My very first psychedelic trip was 200 Morning Glory seeds. And it gave me about a 2-hour-long experience, in which colors were a little bit sparkly and brighter than normal, but the main effect was mental. That is, I felt waves of calm and relaxation, almost in a meditative sense, over my body. I found it interesting to sit there. It was nighttime at the time, so I turned my lamp on. I had a sketch pad and a pen. I was just doodling absent-mindedly. I probably had a shit-eating grin at the time because I was high, honestly. It didn't really give me a great deal of wisdom, but what it did give me was sort of that entrance into the psychedelic experience. Because it was the first substance I used, it was one of those that I kept returning to. And there were times that I used it that it did nothing, including on much higher doses. Now, it could have been the batch of seeds was too old. It could have been that it was the wrong variety. It could have been just their growing conditions led to a lower concentration of LSA and ergine. It could be any of a number of things. Other times it caused quite a drastic effect. Typically, strangely enough, the more I took, the less of an effect it had. And the period of time between uses is important too. Your body quickly builds up tolerance to ergine the same way it does LSD. So if I used Morning Glory and then used it the next day, it wouldn't do anything no matter how much I ever took. Now, the vasoconstriction was a little bit of a problem. And for this reason, if you have any heart problems at all, it would be a definite no-no to use any amount of Morning Glory. You could stroke out. You could kill yourself, honestly. The vasoconstriction did cause limb pain. It did cause a little bit of nausea, but it wasn't that bad. And ultimately, the spiritual experience was rewarding enough. It was just a sense of calm. Now, I would liken it to mescaline. Mescaline did basically the same thing for me on a lower to moderate dose. It didn't give me a visual change quite so much as it gave me a physical sensation. On mescaline, it was tingles up and down the spine, which are very much similar to the result of a really well-made ASMR video or something like that. And the visual effects, which was essentially, well, the ceiling kind of looks like it's melting into clouds or something, was sort of secondary. It was interesting, but it was the physical sensation that really was the takeaway from that. Amanita Muscaria is something that I use quite a few times as well. Of course, the fly agaric mushroom, which doesn't come highly recommended by many people, and I think it has to do with dose. Because if you take too little, it doesn't really do anything. And if you take too much, the muscarine kicks in and you get a full-blown delirium experience as opposed to just a psychedelic high. If you're in that sweet spot between the two, you get a psychedelic experience, in which, for me anyway, it caused colors to melt together a bit. They looked more warm and glowy, almost festive in the most literal sense. It made me feel like I was partially weightless, like my strength was massively increased. It gave me a massive mood lift. And that was generally the gist of it. It also made me feel slightly detached, like my body was moving more slowly through things, but at the same time it was also more agile, more strong. I could lift myself up almost with one hand at that point. I think it unbridles any mental or physical holdbacks on your strength or something along those lines. I can see why it was conflated with like Berserker mode in sort of Norse lore. I'm not sure that that's actually been determined to be true, but I can understand why it would be at least rumored to be true, honestly. And that's a substance that's still used spiritually in Siberia to this day. And then Salvia Divinorum didn't give me much of a spiritual insight, but it was still really warped substance. And it was interesting. It was honestly fun to use because the high was so short. And it was totally random as to the effects. Sometimes I would more or less black out, and things would start spinning around, and then all of a sudden I'd be awake and aware and totally sober again. Other times it made more of a physical sensation. It felt like specifically the right side of my body was melting away from me backwards. At other times it gave me weird hallucinations where objects ran together, formed new things. My keyboard at one point turned into a cobblestone road. I've talked about this. And apparently I told my friend on the phone I had to go kill the Turtle King. It felt like I was in Mario Land or something like that. And I can't remember the name of the artist, but there's a sort of new age psychedelic artist who perfectly depicts the effects of salvia as far as the visual sense goes. I found it to be immensely fun. I found it to be entertaining. Partially, I think, because I never, jumped the gun. Some people, they smoke, they chew a salvia quid, or they smoke a very low extract. It does nothing. So they immediately go to the most powerful extracted leaves, or pure Salvinoran extract, and they smoke a massive amount, and they just blow their mind out. There's no way they can avoid having a total hallucinatory trip at that point. Whereas I didn't do that. I increased the dose from I think I started with the 5 times extract. That did a bit. Then I used 10, and that was sort of what I needed to be using to get an effect without it being too scary. But I never found it to be unpleasant. Nor did I find it to be particularly spiritually rewarding. And that has to be said. It's important to say that. The most spiritually rewarding for me was LSD, though. And I used that on 3 different occasions over the course of a couple of weeks, because I happened to have a line of tabs. The first time I just used a single tab, which, that's the sane thing to do. I increased that to 2 the next time, and it was, whoa, it was more powerful. I wonder why. And anyway, it was interesting. But the main effect that it had on me was to put me in a sort of meditative trance. The visual effects were interesting enough. The sound melted, colors changed, things flashed, grew larger and more warped, and then shrunk, and everything was out of sorts. That was all interesting, but it was really about the feeling to me. The mental feeling of everything is fine, this is what I should be doing at the moment, and I should be essentially meditating. I should be deriving spiritual knowledge from around me. Psychedelic mushrooms didn't really do that for me, like psilocybin. I only took that once because it didn't do much for me other than visual effects. It didn't give me that meditative feeling. It didn't give me a relaxed feeling. It just made me see weird shit. I saw Charles Manson's head floating across my leg. And I've described it several times, but for any newcomers to the channel, we'll describe it again. At one point, when I was sitting there in front of my computer, I was listening to music, which was pleasurable, honestly. And I looked up, and I was in this sort of weird spinning cathedral that was comprised of dewdrops and spiders' webs and crystals and like raindrops and all this weird shiny shit. I mean, it was beautiful, but I was like, what the fuck at that point? Because I wasn't getting that much of a spiritual experience, and in some ways I think that psychedelics choose the user. In some ways I think the person's natural mental state or their spiritual state, whatever you want to say about them, simply coincides with certain substances over others based on how they chemically interact with the human brain. So a substance that one person finds pleasurable, like I did with Morning Glory, may not work for everyone. Most people don't think it's pleasurable. Salvia Divinorum. Some are easier to work with than others. Some are more spiritual than others for a specific user. Amanita mushrooms were spiritual, but they weren't particularly fun to use. LSD was both fun and spiritual for me. Psilocybin was essentially neither. It was basically a neutral experience as far as whether it was pleasurable or not. It was interesting, but not pleasurable. But it didn't give me any real spiritual insight and wasn't worth using again. And then there's spice. Now, spice, which was marketed years ago as legal weed, herbal smoke, legal incense, stuff like that. It was marketed as, it was sort of the counterpart to bath salts, which are also a no-no. You shouldn't be using them as well. I overdosed completely on it, practically blew a gasket, and was actually like out of commission for days. And it left me with lingering depression and PTSD for several years. But looking back at spice, I can honestly say it was the most life-changing substance of all in a way. When I was using it, I was on track to become another 9-to-5 drone, getting some rudimentary, degree from UVM to go off to a 9-to-5 job and be just another drone. Be, I guess, content in my misery of being a work-a-day individual who would have the picket fence and maybe a halfway decent car and spend the next 40 years paying off my student loans, who would essentially abandon online content because I wouldn't have had time to really make it. I wouldn't have essentially thought, I wouldn't have had time to sit and think about philosophical issues, to analyze politics. I never would have become the person that I am today. And so I credit it, begrudgingly, because I never should have been using it in the first place. It was a dumb idea and I could have killed myself. I still have to credit it with literally liberating me from that cycle of life. I dropped out of UVM, and I'm damn glad that I did, because I cut off the spigot of debt that I have to owe to some retard bank. I'm actually glad that I didn't go back and try to finish out my degree. I'd be so far in debt I'd never escape it. No matter how much money I was making, I'd be drowning in debt. And now I can sit here, and I realized, in my solitude, I embraced the darker side of life. I was depressed. I was suicidal at times, honestly, for a couple of years thereafter. I did think about killing myself at the time. I delved into dark wave music and gothic culture and all of that sort of emo stuff that is a little bit cringeworthy, but I found solitude in it, and I found happiness and comfort in it. Because I realized, hey, I already almost died. What am I so fucking worried about? And then, of course, I started over time to feel gradually better. Now I still enjoy that same stuff, but it gives me literal joy. I don't feel depressed anymore. I feel better, honestly, than I did before I started using psychotropics altogether in some ways. I'm sure as hell more ambitious. It taught me that I needed to be self-led. I needed to take responsibility. It certainly helped that I was a Satanist at the time. It taught me that I need to take responsibility for that action and try to salvage some intelligence from it. Now, in full disclosure, in no way, shape, or form would I in a million years suggest using spice. It's an evil substance, it's a poison, it makes you feel poisoned even while you're giggling uncontrollably while you're high on it. It's a bad thing to be doing. Thankfully, the specific chemical I was using at the time, I believe is now completely illegal and they no longer really market it. Don't use it, though. It's a terrible idea. These little, like, foil packets you get in smoke shops or online that contain these various chemical blends. it's not natural, it's not safe, it's not a clean high in any way, shape, or form. I've never heard anybody describe it as a clean high. In some states, you can smoke marijuana. If you can smoke marijuana, just fucking do that, I suppose. It's legal in some states and countries now, so I can actually say, yeah, it's generally considered safe. The DEA considers it unsafe, but, you know, they might legalize it in the future. There are people on YouTube who sit there and dab, so who fucking cares at this point? As far as psychotropics go, though, that one absolute train wreck disaster of a trip that put me out of commission for so long made me who I am now. I wouldn't be talking to tens of thousands of people on a daily basis if not for that. I wouldn't have become an editor. I wouldn't have written a book. My early attempts at writing and editing and so forth come in the wake of that for several years. Unsuccessfully, I had to keep at it. I had to have that ambition. Then they started paying off, and now they're paying off massively. Putting myself out there online to analyze things, not hold back because I think, well, people will judge me. They'll say, well, I'm just some dude with a webcam. They won't take me seriously. Now, behold, I no longer have to worry about that crap. I'm headed on towards 100,000 fans on here, and that never would have happened. At the time, I think I had less than 10,000 subscribers. I think I had less than 5,000, actually, at the time that happened, if I remember correctly. It wasn't a lot of people that were bothering to watch me because I didn't have that much to say. In a way, using these psychotropics opened up my mind to these new avenues to let me explore the occult without worrying about being seen as fucking crazy. And that led to my editing, it led to my writing, it led to most of the income I'm making now. I don't have to have a job like a 9-to-5, I don't have to have a boss, I don't have to go finish out my degree and get more debt, it's not necessary. It's not going to teach me anything I haven't already learned, essentially. I can read all the books that anyone there is going to read on my own time. I don't need to be enrolled in some course that costs $20,000 a semester in order to read a bunch of books. Hell, I'm doing it for a living. I make YouTube videos, and it's all very happy. I'm living by my own schedule. I'm doing what I need to be doing in the world. I've discovered that. But before that happened, I thought what I needed to be doing was, I had just always sort of passively absorbed the idea, I have to go to college. Because I don't want to, be 9-to-5 at Wendy's or something. I need to go to college. I need to get a degree. Now I look around at those that were in the same class. More than half of them, they're still 9-to-5 at Wendy's. There's still, some of them are NEETs, some of them dropped out and they have the minimum wage job, some of them have master's degrees and they're not even in the field they studied. So I am extremely glad that it knocked me out of commission. In retrospect, it allowed me to dedicate the time that I needed during that recovery period of a couple of years to analyzing the world, thinking about things more deeply, embracing avenues that I hadn't before. It was good for me in my life. It was extremely unpleasant at the time. It could have killed me, and it was ultimately a dumb mistake that I made. But it made me who I am, and I can say that now. And so, in a way, I owe almost dying with my entire livelihood. It's a rather interesting concept when you think about it. Again, though, disclaimer, I would never in a million years encourage you to use it. Unless you happen to want to completely crack your mind and be miserable for years, if you think you can deal with that, I don't know. Some of these substances are still apparently legal, but they're certainly sure as hell not safe. People end up in the ER all the time. They also have all these like weird chemical drugs they manufacture, the ivory mist and spice and all of these other terms they use. And it's retarded. If ever there was an argument for ending the drug war, it's get rid of all these synth substances and bring back all the natural stuff. Half the time it grows around you anyway. There are Amanita mushrooms growing around here. There's psilocybin-containing species growing all over the place if you know where to look. LSD, that's not that far from a natural substance. Ergot still grows on rye crops all over the place. So yeah, a little bit about my own experiences making me who I am today. All the power and abilities that I have come from almost killing myself with a psychotropic substance, essentially. Which is not the greatest thing. I mean, I still look back on that period, I'm like, I don't even know how I survived it, I was so sad. It got to the point, I'd go into the shower, I'd just sit there in the shower with extremely hot water washing over me for a couple of hours at a time when I was still at UVM. That's how depressed I was. Because I didn't want to be alone and lonely, but I also didn't want the anxiety of dealing with people, so there was really no recourse. I just sort of receded online and did what I needed to do, and that's what made me this. That's what brought my success. It also opened up my mind so I could think about things more independently. I thought I had to get a degree in order to succeed, whatever the fuck that means. Oh, you succeeded. You're making 40K. You're still working the same hours as that minimum wage slave. You're still at the whim of your employer. You're still not really doing anything fundamental in the world that you could be doing on your own time. You're just making a little bit more money. Okay, the car you use to drive through that traffic jam every morning is a little nicer than your compatriot. You've succeeded in life. You know, the garden that you don't have time to tend is a little bit larger than your compatriot. You've succeeded in life. You know, your wife popped out a couple of kids. You're successful. I just don't see it that way. I can't live that sort of lifestyle. I've remarked before. I'd rather be a hobo or die than live that sort of life. Some people, they're perfectly happy with it. If you are, more power to you. Whatever that lifestyle happens to be. But I can't do that. It's just not in my nature. It never has been. I was fooling myself the entire time when I was going to college. I never should have bothered attending. I should have gone to a community college, gotten the basic necessities, and read a lot of books. That's what I should have done. That'd be my advice to a lot of others. Don't bite off more than you can chew in academia. Don't run yourself into debt because you might not even get a job in your field. That's what no high school is going to tell you. Your teachers and professors will never be honest with you about that fact. Most of you, if you get a degree, will not have a job in your field. Those that do will have a job generally not exactly what they wanted anyway, and you're still going to be a 9-to-5 worker. What's the point? In some cases, for some of you, at least a slim minority, there is no point, and that's the secret. They just want your money. That's about all. Peace out.